Okay, so good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our session. This session is part of a series of online discussions that we've been organizing at Sirius Art Center in Cobh with the artist Colette Lewis and with Cobh Zero Waste, a local organization concerned with ecological and environmental questions. So Sirius is an organization in Cobh, and we have been developing a lot of what I would say discursive programs in order to introduce a little bit more critical discourse into the mindset of the organization and into the interactions and relationships that we create with our constituents, those that work with us, those that are our audiences, those that are interested in what we have to say. We started in December, where each one of us introduced themselves, each organization, and Colette presented her work. And we continued the conversations with a guest speaker, Angie Nagel, in December, who is a local activist who has also been seen as an example of someone who's changed her lifestyle and the lifestyle of her family according to a more positive understanding of the relationship between humans and the environment. And then we had a session in January, which I led with Colette, on theoretical and practical framework based on the writings and reflections of a scholar based in Australia, Kathrin Böhm. And we were referring specifically to a book that has been published a few years ago called Take Back the Economy, where there is where it is proposed an alternative understanding to the current and dominant mainstream understanding and practice of capitalism. So that somehow those two sessions somehow created the scenario through which we are going to operate within the next months. One is about creating an intellectual framework that enables us to empower ourselves and empower those that are working with us around questions that relate to circular economies, but also localized examples of practice that are relevant to us. Within that context, we thought that it was absolutely fundamental to hear from Kathrin Böhm, an artist who has been involved not only in terms of a practice with a lot of community-based work and political activist work, but also an artist who has collaborated with Kathrin Böhm and used some of those ideas or contributed to some of those ideas in her own work. I have the pleasure and the privilege of having met Kathrin when I worked in England a few years ago. And since then, we've kept a conversation that hopefully will continue in the future and will add into more contributions in the Cork area where we are operating now. So Kathrin is based in London, and I'm going to read a bit from a biography because I think also by reading what I'm going to say now, just introduces very well the mindset and the type of work which is completely different from what we might understand is an art practice, and also even an art practice with a social component. So she considers herself local in Hackney and Hoffen, and she operates in and outside of the field of art. Her main interests include the collective reproduction of public space, trade as public realm, and the everyday as a starting point for culture. At the moment, she says that she stopped starting new projects and is currently working around what she has produced in the past as an artist to pave the ground for evolving infrastructures such as projects or collectives or organizations that she will talk about, but also to basically work as a sort of as a sort of practice of instituting in collaboration with arts organizations and others. Kathrin is mostly known for us here in this session through her work within the context of company drinks, which she will present today. but she has also been involved in many other collectives, Public Works, My Villages, Keep It Complex, really stressing what we usually call a distributed authorship. So where collaboration is at the core of ideas and interventions in the world. Kathrin, you also may be able to say any other words that you may feel relevant in terms of a short introduction, or you may then start sharing your thoughts. I want to thank you so much for your time today and for being with us and sharing your ideas. And I'm really sure that it will be very influential and informative in some of the thinking and work that we are doing and planning to do in the future here in Cork and in Cobh in particular.
Thanks, Miguel, and thanks, Colette. Are you handing over?
Yes.
We are a small round, so please, at any point, if there are any questions, interrupt, ask. There's no need for sticking to like me giving a formal presentation and Q&A. I see this very much as things between colleagues. You work on topics I'm working on, so this is a peer-to-peer session where I'm giving a bit more space to talk about what I've done. So yeah, so just to set the tone, just ask at any time and ask anything. I think that's the beauty of small rounds, that I don't have to pretend that things are successful. You just ask me how things actually work. I have prepared a PowerPoint because I can't talk without images. And I think it's also nice to maybe give quite practical examples of how I apply ideas around economy. So I'm going to share this in a minute. I'm sitting in Hackney. Long day. I'm really exhausted in a way. And I work in a lot of different economic contexts. So I'm constantly, I can watch myself over the day switching my language around economies. But we can talk about this, which I think is also interesting. So I go into a presentation. Now I just share. And then please interrupt me at any point. I think it's going to be like, no, that's not what I want to share. What can you see?
Yeah, now we can see your PowerPoint, yeah.
Okay, and if I turn this now to presentation mode, can you see just the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, I'm never sure with like Zoom. Okay, so I wanted to like, because I know you're working with the redrawing the economy concept of Catherine Gibson, and we are closely working together and have been working together for a few years. So I wanted to refer to this idea of the economy as an iceberg or the economy as a drinks cabinet, but also to the idea of like taking back the economy through redrawing it and through practicing different sets of economies. So I sometimes wonder why I end up in this field of economy and business and call myself an entrepreneur if I have to. And I think it comes from a very basic understanding of the two areas I'm most interested in as an artist are public space or architecture and economy, both as public realms where we influence the culture that is around us, the culture of like space making, making community, but also the culture of like creating economies. And I think that every day is where we get a sense of what we can do and how we can affect society. So architecture and economy are in a way my bigger interests than art, and the two main areas of practice over the last years. And I just wanted to show this very quickly. An exhibition I curated with Gavin Wade at Eastside Projects, I think in 2013, was called Trade Show. Eastside has a whole series of shows called Curtain Show, Painting Show, like the idea of showing practice. And for Trade Show, we decided to show artists whose practice is to trade or to run business. And at the time, it seemed important to it was important for me and Gavin to, like, with that exhibition, to also to move the language around artists who work with economy away from a strictly kind of anti-capitalist narrative, which I don't find useful when I work within communities to talk about anti-capitalism. It can polarize things very easily. So trade show was more within the sense of showing artists who set up different systems of trading, different kind of economic systems, and who have this as the very core of their practice. So art not being a discipline that comments or represents ideas about the dominant economy, but that very kind of confidentially, to show art that kind of doesn't even think of itself as an alternative, but as like a way of doing things differently. And we showed people like Kate Ridge, who you probably know. She's based in Bristol. She has had trade as a main form of kind of creative and artistic practice for like 12, 15 years. She runs a program called Feral Trade, where she simply like documents and organizes the flow of goods along value and social connections. And artists like Kate Ridge don't talk about themselves as like alternative economies. They talk about themselves as possible economies. And I think that was the main interest of Trade Show, to establish a narrative that wasn't anti-capitalist, but in the sense of Kathrin Gibson, more emancipatory, in the sense that we just we can practice things within our own value sets and on our own terms. And they're not alternatives, but they are as well. There was the International Village Shop, something I've been involved in with my villages, which is trading goods that are made collectively in different rural communities. And we set up a kind of trans-local trading system to trade, but also communicate between rural communities. And again, this is a practice that is focused on what's a possible collective production, what's a possible collective discussion of value sets, and a system of trade. So I'm quickly coming to Kathrin Gibson. You probably know this image very well. Kathrin Gibson, who has kind of pinned this idea of take back the economy, and the economy as an iceberg, and this very simple image that just explains in like less than 2 seconds that we are all part of the economy. So if we think of the economy as a big sphere or territory, it has very many different practices. Unfortunately, the one that's most visible and most dominant is the one that's organized around capitalist ideas. But the whole point of Kathrin Gibson is to not act from a position of like it is of course anti-capitalist, but the enabling of everyone realizing we are part of economies, we are part of economic practices, and let's just tilt this iceberg so that the diversity of economic practices is actually recognized and used to explain how things work. So for Trade Show, one of the first deals we had was with Kathrin Gibson, that she would write an essay about the economy as an iceberg, and we redesigned the iceberg. And again, that kind of deal, the practice of that deal was part of the exhibition, where the practice happens on a one-to-one scale towards the exhibition. If you have any questions, I hate talking to a screen. Anyway, I keep talking. So this image is highly important, highly influential. It's explained in 2 seconds, but it's a very useful tool to say economy is a public realm, economy is a cultural realm, which of course incorporates extremely exploitative and abusive forms of trade, but economy is a diverse set of practices. We are all involved in it. The way we organize things around us is the way we kind of influence economy within a wider scheme.
So Kathrin, can I ask you a question now?
Yeah.
So could you elaborate just slightly on, so had you been familiar with research? How did you encounter it? And the iceberg drawing itself has been redone in different occasions. And I was wondering whether when you mentioned that you created this one here or reimagined it in exchange of the contribution for the exhibition.
I mean, I can completely admit, like, I met Catherine Gibson through Doina in Paris. The Doina Petrescu and Constantin Petcu are running this project called Roban, which is looking into like other ways of organizing neighborhoods. And I met Catherine Gibson, someone I would normally read and be very intimidated. And she is this amazing person who, through her writing, but also through the way she communicates, allows everybody to be an economical expert. So I'm interested in economy, but no, I haven't studied it. I know certain things, but I'm confident. But I think her power is to really explain, we are all doing this. It's an everyday practice. Get involved, take it back. I mean, that's taking back the economy, literally. Acknowledge yourself as an economic person. You don't have to be a specialist, but you know enough how things work or don't work around you, and take this voice and use this voice. So this was like highly important to me, but also obviously to meet her in person and to just feel that this was a genuine suggestion and not a theoretical idea. And out of this, we had those more kind of casual conversations around, can we swap an essay for a redesign, where of course you have to have a certain level of like knowing the person or like intimacy. But she is genuinely very generous around this idea of empowering others and making you feel that you can talk about economy without maybe knowing the whole history or the whole feminist writing about it. And I think it's an incredibly generous and genuine position.
Can I just ask you, did you just say that you swapped the essay for the redesign of this? No, that was really nice. Yeah.
But it's also like, I mean, now I'm a bit mean, because Catherine Gibson's idea of art is like we make things look nicer. So we're kind of educating each other. So she's kind of educating us as kind of creatives about histories of economic thinking and feminist economies. But we also educate her around artistic practice, not just being a kind of aesthetical practice, but maybe a kind of organizational, relational practice. So there's not just a swap in terms of redesign for text, but also a swap in terms of understanding each other's knowledge and expertise a bit better. So I know relatively little about economy, but I would say I know more about art. So there's an acknowledgement of each other's knowledge. And I think that's just, again, symbols her understanding of trade, acknowledging that someone else has a value I might not have, and we can stop this.
Yeah.
Her text was, the briefing for the text was that it had to be in relatively plain English. So the discussion around economy can't be kind of a academic, specialized, hyper politicized one. It has to be possible to have this discussion in relatively plain terms. So of course, there's like the iceberg is just, it's this very simple distinction between things that are visible and visible. And it doesn't mean that the invisible doesn't exist. It's just less visible for various reasons. And this can be as an idea used for almost any context. And I think those drawings here were made to think about the art world. The art world, like if you just spoke to Colette, it's quite funny, Miguel, because of course his whole dark matter theory is that, of course, we have the kind of market-driven art world on top, and we have all the kind of other ecosystems below doesn't mean that one is worth more than the other. It just means that one dominates more than the other. And I mean, I know that you're like talking about the whole kind of redrawing the economy and the work and the tools that are being used by the community economy network. And one of the tools is this very simple tool to map out what are the economies around us, me as a community, and how do I start to visualize what's visible, what's less visible, and how things are interacting. And this is from literally a workshop in Colombia, where a small community got together to understand their own economic practices, and they just used things around them to map out how the economy that affects them operates. So it's a very literal use of the word mapping out the economy around you, based on this idea like what's visible, what's less visible, but paying attention to all the economic practices that actually allow or support or strain the world that is around you. And I mean, we've done a whole research project around this idea of redrawing and drawing using the iceberg, and it's a very simple tool to talk about that the economy is a practice we're all involved with. And this was a workshop in Korea where different community organizations mapped their economies in terms of what's visible, what's less visible, and then compare it to each other. So it's just a very simple workshop tool to open up the economy as a topic we can all, as specialists, get involved in, because we know about certain parts of it quite well. That's towards the art economy, and I mean, that's just like, maybe it's not so, but like if you look at the right, on the right hand one, like institutions as the visible ones, the kind of whole ecosystems, that's the kind of Gregory Cholette idea of the official art world and the ecosystems which remain invisible. So this like division line of visible and invisible can be used very easily to look at different industries and sectors in terms of what's the dominant economy and how can we relate to this. I have to look at the time because I can easily talk for too long, which I don't want to. Miguel, I can't hear you.
No, I was just curious to see on these collages that you've made, which you may want to talk more about, that the line, the color of the line that you're using is blue, and the use of the blue color within the art history as a divider is quite well known within, say, Central Eastern European avant-garde within this post-war. This is just kind of like,
I'm not aware of this.
So with this, yeah, I thought this was just my kind of connection. Now I was looking at it, but it's interesting anyhow that you were referring to using the divides and the color and within the art context as an illustration, and then it brought me to some other practices that are much more, have nothing to do with what you're saying, but have another connection that I feel.
Okay, I look into the blue line.
Yeah.
So I think to like slowly introduce company drinks, you can see a drinks cabinet in the middle here, and the drinks cabinet is a little bit like the iceberg. So if you would close the cabinet doors, you would just see the drinks on top. So if you think of a drinks company, you would think of drinks as the commodities that make the business. And then we use the kind of iceberg analogy to say, well, let's look at the whole drinks cabinet. Let's open the doors below. And I'm going to explain company drinks in a minute. But it's to say, of course, we have commodities, there are products, there are prices, but the economies that underpin something like company drinks within the iceberg model are very kind of diverse set of economies, from volunteering to cultural grants to donations to compulsory work. Wait, someone's walking. Who's coming in here? Anyway. To in-kind. So we kind of literally translated the idea of an iceberg to a model for a drinks company that's both a drinks company and an arts program, Company Drinks. It's our logo. It's consciously ambiguous. The C can be interpreted in different ways. Obviously, it means company drinks. And the word company is interesting because it both refers to being an enterprise and being a kind of social space. But the C is such a kind of icon. I mean, people think it's the congestion chart. No, it's not. But, you know, it could stand for communism, community, cola, many different things. And that from the set, from the beginning of Company Drinks was very kind of a conscious moment to have an open branding that can be super precise, but also open for different interpretations. And I'm going to explain Company Drinks relatively quickly, like how it contextualizes itself. It's connecting itself to history of East End, like East End communities from the East End of London, this kind of like traditional East End working class community working as seasonal labor in Kent to pick hops. And that's not a unique history, it's kind of quite a universal history that cheap inner city, economically deprived inner city communities would work as seasonal laborers in the nearby countryside as cheap labor. So roughly between 1850 and 1950, mainly women and the children would work as seasonal pickers in Kent to pick hops, like a highly profitable cash crop. And they were literally just used as like available cheap labor to pick this. But what's interesting is that because it was up to 100,000 women and children every year who would go from London to Kent, it's one of the few moments where a kind of inner city working class community had its very own rural culture and heritage. And it is a very still present memory that there was this connection between London and Kent. And I wanted at the time, I wanted to start something in London, which I consider my hometown, that could bring a lot of different aspects together, like my interest in the relationships between the rural and the urban, my interest in like different economies, my interest in like feminist practices and so on. So when I heard about this history, I thought there was something really interesting about this kind of economic exchange. But if you read oral history about it, women would refer to it as getting away from London, having financial interdependence, being able to set their own culture for 3 or 4 weeks. So a kind of very rich memory of a practice from the past. So that was the starting point for Company Drinks. And at no point did we want to reenact it. But looking at it as a memory of a culture and an economic practice and how it could be relevant today. So this is my very crude mapping of London. I like this. So there's the old kind of East End and this like train line going to Kent, the Hopping Express, that was this connection for that history for like 100 years. But of course, things have completely changed, like the geography of London has completely changed. A lot of the East End communities have moved to the outer boroughs. So Company Drinks is based in Barking and Dagenham. That's why it's on the map. So a kind of like move towards like suburban living in the kind of 30s, 40s, which now again is completely overrun again by a different shift of communities and demographics coming into London, but also Barking and Dagenham being officially within Essex. So they're not even considering themselves London. So kind of quite an interesting mix between a shift in geographies and demographics where Company Drinks started. So we are based in Barking and Dagenham and started in 2014 with this relatively simple invitation of going picking again. And we knew that this term, let's go picking, would be recognized by anyone who had anyone in their families who ever went hop picking. We knew that. but we also wanted to talk about or invite everybody who lives there now to think about what does going picking mean. It's about collectivity, it's about nature, it's about food production and so on. So we started with this like super simple invitation with the idea that the picking itself was less of a kind of reminiscing moment that we want to reenact, but that the picking as a collective activity becomes part of a circular economy that's seasonal and that in itself creates company drinks. So the idea that the production cycle can almost be seen as a public space with different moments where you come in to get engaged based on your own interest in different moments of the production, and this over the year and over time defines company drinks. So the C, of course, has to do with commoning as a possible economic practice on a one-to-one scale, and it's going back to trade show, the idea that you practice ideas in art on a one-to-one scale, on a scale of a company. So of course, it's about using the public realm that we have. It's about being in public time. It's about working together. It's extremely localized. And it's about culturing a system within company drinks that is both an economic, but also a social system of sharing and using and organizing resources that are available to us together. So to make it concrete, we go picking all the time, even now. But some of the first picking trips were invitations to former hop pickers to go hop picking in Kent, invitations to family to go to local parks or the nearby countryside. And then, so those two groups, this is voluntary picking, this is compulsory picking. That secondary school children were super unhappy that they have to pick strawberries because they really find it awful. But obviously their teachers have identified a value in like understanding where your food grows. So with them, we go to a local, there's an organic farm in Dagenham again, which nobody knows about. So the picking is also about exploring your actual physical environment, the places you actually live nearby or within, and to think of them as like food growing and productive spaces. There's many trips every year. Some repeat themselves annually. That's a hop picking trip, mainly with members of families or even people who have been hop picking in the past. And we go to a farm in Kent, a very nice farmer who allows us to turn up with like 60, 70 people during the main hop harvest. And we pick for the day. This is a gleaning trip. What's also interesting within the way we go picking is that we unveil the different economies behind food production. So here, for example, on the hop farm, we get the hops for free because the farmer thinks we bring a lot of publicity to British hop growing. This trip here is a gleaning trip. It's a farm that grows for Ribena. They're contracted. They have to, I don't know, whatever, deliver 800 tons of blackcurrant every year. And we pick once the commercial harvest is done. That's a big family trip. That's one of the trips where I'm always really nervous because you advertise in Barking and Dagenham, we go picking, and you really don't know what people interpret. And we go to the countryside and we just make sure we explain to everyone, it's not a cute farm, there's not going to be cute animals, there's no cafe, it's a field. And I would say 99% of the people who are coming understand that, and they're coming because many families want to show the children that food actually grows on plants and you can pick them and eat them. The range of people who come to those picking trips is very, very broad, which also makes the kind of going picking a very universal activity. You know, you go picking anywhere in the world. You go to your garden, grow something and pick it. So those trips are really good moment to also detach the kind of hop picking history from going picking and make it a more universal and commonly remembered activity. So then the documentation of the trips makes the label of the bottle. The labels talk about where we've been, who went picking, what the deal was. And so the drinks, and they are important, start to kind of embody and document the actual collective picking process. We are introducing moments of talking about economy at many points. So for those picking trips, we have those simple in and out sheets. We are asking everybody who's coming to do like a little balance sheet, like what do you invest in today, what you bring, what's your contribution, what you take out. And I think that's very much within the kind of Gibson Graham sense of taking back the economy that talks about everybody bringing and taking, and it's about recognizing this. We then produce the labels as well, where we talk about the economy not just being costs and price, but identifying the quantifiables, like how many people came, how much did we pick. We kind of identify the financials. There's always money involved in those trips. The coat, costs £658, but we're also trying to list the unquantifiables, the things people took or were invested into making this drink, from the value of someone's daughter going to the countryside for the first time, but also the sun allowing those black currant to ripen. And this pattern repeats itself in every bottle, a kind of story around who went, where did we go, what's the deal. This is a drink I'm showing to come to just briefly introduce the idea of like the usership in art. So for example, one drink we make is from different community gardens that grow herbs. So every year the drinks range changes a little bit, and someone says, oh, I know someone who's growing something, and we quite quickly can respond to this and go there and pick. So that's a drink we made with herbs grown across, I think, 10 different community gardens in London. And then, oh, sorry, now I'm jumping a bit. And there's cola making, that's with Kate Rich. That's not with locally picked ingredients, but it's to make cola concentrate from scratch with teenagers, to talk about the politics of soft drinks making and the price making behind soft drinks and so on. We are bottling. And so then every year we would have a drinks range, which to me is a bit like the group photo we saw in the beginning. The idea that those drinks represent a lot who lives in Barking and Dagenham, what grows in Barking and Dagenham, who contributes with which idea to making drinks, and revealing the different deals between behind the different drinks. We are trading them. Well, not last year because there was no live events, but half of the drinks stay in the borough, and we either trade them at cost price or give them away for free, and half of the stock goes to the art world, where we trade them at maximum profit. So that's at Freeze Art Fair, where we had a bar for the last 6 years. But we would also be at many local events in Barking and Dagenham, but not profit orientated, but more in terms of redistributing drinks. There's honesty shelves in various situations, from exhibitions to local library. And here, sorry, this slide was in the wrong place. But this usership of art is key to company drinks. The idea when I showed you the cycle of this, the kind of circular economy of you can enter at different points with different interests, is super important in terms of everybody can use it on their own terms. And just to bring it back to the art context, here the drinks were used in a landscape exhibition. And the drinks themselves, of course, kind of create a landscape of what's growing and being picked in Barking today. So that's a kind of art world version of us. We have a building. The first 4 years we were nomadic. For the last 3 years we had a permanent base. An old bowls pavilion in Barking Park, where we have a kind of training and small production kitchen and social spaces. There's our Economy as a drinks cabinet installation on the right. I'm gonna finish in a second. And then so company drinks can be those many different things to many different people. You know, it can be everything from reminiscing the hop picking to showing your kids how fruit grows, to coming for a free drink, to go for an educational event about alternative economies, or just come because we do first aid training. But what we wanted to do 2 years ago was to also connect a kind of arts discussion back to the program, to the different program strands at Company Drinks. So Cobh, Schroeder and myself initiated the Center for Plausible Economies, where we particularly talk about artistic practice as economic practice and how this can be used in the arts and beyond. And that's my official role tonight as well. I'm talking as a representative of the Center for Plausible Economies. I have 4 more slides and I finish. When we talk about economies, one of the of course, within social enterprises, all makes a lot of sense what we are doing. Within the bigger picture, there's always like you get compared to capitalist business and the logic. And one of the questions that always comes is like, how do you scale this? How can this become bigger? How do you actually affect more than just your immediate local community? And with the Community Economy Institute, Kathrin Gibson and other people are involved. We kind of developed this idea of the interdependence as a kind of logo and identifier that can be used by organizations like Company Drinks, but also other initiatives and organizations and research programs who look into or who practice on the basis of community economies. And we start to use the IDT as a kind of identifier to show that we are, first of all, connected, but also interdependent. So that's a relatively new thing. It's not fully launched yet. It's going to launch in March, but it's part of Company Drinks. It's part of our connection with the Community Economy Institute, and it's part of a more international and translocal thinking about how can we talk about scale and show scale. So the IDT is this label that will slowly replace the limited. That's my hopeful thinking tonight. But that's the idea that we as practitioners, initiatives, organizations who organize ourselves around ideas of the community economies model start using the IDT to show our connectivity, but also our interdependence. So that's the latest chapter within the kind of journey of Company Drinks, and I think it shows quite in a nice way how, on the one hand, we're completely rooted, like we're completely localized within Barking and Dagenham, but through this IDT can also signal that we are part of a much bigger and kind of international discussion around how to take back the economy. Stop sharing and I stop talking.
Thank you so much, Kathrin, for such absolutely brilliant, fantastic, and rich presentation and journey, more than a presentation, it was a journey through several ideas. And
I talked very fast. I'm sorry. I think it's just this thing at the screen in front of you. You like start pacing quite quickly.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I think we have an opportunity now to all benefit from your experience and your knowledge and your practice. So I will, of course, and will open up to everyone who wants to make a comment, ask a question. But you know, I could start with. I'd like to start with you with this question, which is something like, when you developed Company Drinks originally at the beginning, and there is a moment in your talk where you discuss it. You were commissioned by an agency or an arts organization, right? And was it Create? No. So it's a London-based arts organization. And at what stage do you feel that, like, because then you ended your talk referring to IDT and questions around scale and scaling, and you know, this is actually very typical within the entrepreneurial world. You know, like you have a prototype, or you have an idea, you prototype it, and you scale it up, and that's when it starts being produced. And my question to you is, maybe it's not so much a question, but it's just like asking to reflect a little bit, like in which moment Company Drinks became more than what you maybe thought originally, or it grew in a direction that maybe you didn't thought, and from a seed funding towards maybe a very specific localized project, there was the opportunity to continue it. And how do you actually feel today when you move from that initial moment of hopping and picking and making something into something that looks like an organization, where you show the site, the building, the spaces, the complex process? How do you feel now? You like your role even within it yourself? You know, like I'm not sure. Am I making?
Yeah. No, I mean, so the beginning was funded through Create. What did they have? They had a program, Create Award. But that wasn't accidental. I was working for like 2 years quite actively and networking and telling a lot of people that I wanted to set something up in London that can be more long-term and that allows me to bring different interests together, like the interest in the rural and the urban, the interest as like economy as a cultural practice, my interest in like creating public space. So it was prepared. So when we got the award for it, even the seed money was immediately organized to support a potentially more long-term structure. So we only used half of it in the first year to make sure we have money for the next year. And then, I mean, I've worked in collectives always. You know, I've run partnerships and limiteds and everything. If you ask me about how I feel about Company Drinks now, it's I think it took me 2 years to understand that once you become an organization, you also have different responsibilities. You know, those more, like if you work in an artist collective, you don't have them because you like work with very like-minded people with like similar practices. But I think especially the Black Lives Matter movement last year made it super obvious that we have to sort out our organizational structure. You know, policies, procedures, anti-racism statements, all of this. So that's something I underestimated when it started in 2014. And that's taking up a lot of time and resources at the moment to actually give the organization a clarity that still can communicate the values you want, but makes it transparent. And I have to say, as an artist who's worked in a lot of artist collectives before, because you're so much in your own bubble, you're like, you know, it's nice, everybody knows what I mean, but actually not. There's a kind of organizational responsibility that you have to address institutional racism, you have to address your policies, you have to do that. And that's, I was a little bit naive about having to take this responsibility at some point.
Could I add a question to that? I'm just curious to know, what is the legal structure of the organization? Like,
We're
what are you?
just a community interest company. It's a limited company.
Okay.
And at the time, when we moved it away from being an arts project to establish a kind of legal form, it was a pragmatic decision. You know, we all would love to be a cooperative. We didn't have the capacity or resource or the network at the time to set it up as such. And I mean, we can talk about this in great detail. Like, ultimately, you can organize the organization around your values. You know, limited doesn't stop you from being to work in a cooperative manner. But it was a very pragmatic decision at the time.
But it's also when you refer to say the interest or the utilization or the drawing from the ethos of usership and ideas of use, somehow that puts it immediately this like you were very clear now, you know, like it starts as an art project under the umbrella of an artist and it goes into something else. So the fact that maybe company drinks is still associated with you from the perspective of, say, someone working within the art sector, but potentially from others who have no connection with the art sector, they may be associating company drinks with other people or with just a brand or something else, which somehow suggests this idea that the work evolved in a way that is no longer, is being taken forward by others, and it exists as others make use of it as well, no?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was the I think this discussion, I mean, we started it as a kind of organizational reflection before Black Lives Matter. But of course, I think with Black Lives Matter and the whole issue of like, how do you use your privilege to set up things to then use them to capitalize your own currency as an artist, it has become super urgent. You know, how can I even, you know, how do the ethics of it all work? So we had to have a discussion around, is the art aspect of interest to more than just me? And it is. And I think it's also then I have to think of Stephen Wright and this idea of like, you probably work less as an artist in those ways, but you work more like with your artistic competence. And you know, that's things I can't assume. It's something that needs to be confirmed by the collective. And I think what I brought in as an artist who claims economy as a cultural realm, who introduced Catherine Gibson and the whole idea of community economies, that's a particular competence that Company Drinks as a team, and it's 6 of us, does recognize of value, and therefore we continue it. But at the moment I couldn't just maintain it because it's an interesting art project. You know, my interest in economy as a cultural practice needs to be shared across the team, and then we incorporate it again into what we do, and that's happening at the moment.
And can I ask something there, Kathrin? You know, how long was that transition from, say, being an art project, like you start something out, you're leading it, you know, you build the company, you build the kind of the capacity of the people around you, and then you're transitioning into this state that you're in right now. Like, how long was that? And I'm also wondering, because I'm guessing you started about 2014. So you tell me how long the transition is, but could it have been done faster, or is the pace that you did it at the right pace that it happened?
No, I think it could have been faster. You know, if I have had more experience in setting up community organizations, I would have been aware of certain things earlier.
Can you give us a clue about what you mean?
Like policies. I thought policies are boring. They're absolutely essential. and policy, it's boring. It's it's as boring as like fundraising or finding money, but it's how do you articulate the values and cultures that you want in all elements of the organization. So we focus far too much on just doing things in a way we wanted to do them, but we didn't spend enough time on underpinning them with like organizational clarity and policies and all of that.
So if you brought somebody in as a collaborator early on in the process where that was their interest or that was their expertise, would that have helped?
Yeah, but I think within this whole field of social engaged practice, the training, and even though I've worked in many different contexts with a lot of exposure to a lot of possibilities, I think if the training in itself would train those things as well, that if you set up organizations as an artist, that's maybe the responsibilities that come with it, whether you like it or not, would help. So of course I always knew it, but I think Black Lives Matter and this like white privilege position suddenly made me like going like, shit, of course, I can do an arts project because so it was a combination of things, of checking why you can do certain things the way you do them because you arrive with immense privilege, and a need to actually organize your organization around the values that you don't just want to activate and represent, but you also really have to embed them within the kind of structure of the organization.
That's very useful. Yeah,
I feel stupid. I literally feel stupid that.
But it's a learning process. I don't think you need to feel stupid. You had no experience with this, and your eyes have been opened in recent years, like all of ours, I guess. So
I think we all learned a lot, the last year. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, I wanted to ask you as well. So it kind of went from an art project to like an enterprise, and you were talking about how in the past these people were picking for next to nothing, and now you're asking people. It's a voluntary project basically. So how do you present this as to people? To of course we've talked about all the other benefits that are not just economical, as in the top of the economy, meaning money. But how do you communicate this to people who are not aware of this, or people who might actually be from backgrounds where they might have been exploitation or low wage backgrounds, that kind of thing. So I'd be very interested in hearing how you did that.
Yeah, normally you mention economy and most people switch off. It's not it's not the favorite topic to chat about when you're like, ugh. So I think what I showed earlier is like in and out sheet. I think, and a lot of people, of course, see company drinks mainly as a social space. Just by bringing this in and out sheet in to say we are actually about an economy and how you organize relationships around using things and producing things and trading them. And we are trying to be relatively or quite honest about the fact that the drinks don't run the enterprise. Because if they were, we would either have to like seriously exploit people or export everything to a market that's not local. So like, like a colonial practice of like taking things from where you make it to somewhere else where you can make money. And so we are trying to build those aspects in as much as we can constantly.
But when you try to get people to get involved to do this, how do you reach all these different people and
I think it's with
a simple message?
Yeah, I think it's this invitation to go picking. It's super simple, and the deal is half of what you pick you can keep yourselves, and half please donate to the communal pot, and then and that's kind of evaluation we mainly do through conversation, trying to find out why people find this interesting.
Yeah,
there's quite a broad range from, well, the teachers think it is actually of great value if their kids actually go to a farm and pick a strawberry. So that's the teacher's assessment of the value. And they think it's a fair enough deal that we offer this opportunity and the kids have to go, full stop.
Yeah, for schools, I can see that. Yeah, yeah.
With the picking trips, it's the value of having access to the countryside.
Yeah, because I read one of the comments was the first time they took their kids to the countryside, and that's so hard for me to imagine that that is not accessible for these people otherwise, and it's a free trip. So yeah.
And I think just in general, access to the countryside.
Yeah.
Like, how do you go to the countryside other than to a theme park? Like, how do you get onto a farm unless you know a farmer? So I think the reasons are very varied. We are trying to make it clear that people should only enter that situation if they think it's a fair deal. You know, if anyone feels exploited by us taking them to a field and they have to pick all day, then. But I think because of this balance sheet makes a helpful conversation around what do I want to give and what can I take. I think this like mutual agreement of not exploiting each other is really helpful. And also like the balance sheet in terms of valuing things that normally probably aren't valued.
Thanks.
I mean, for all the older hop pickers, it's of course completely invaluable a day to go back to hop farm. You know, the kind of nostalgic value of the day is just unreal, like almost too much sometimes. But we always try to make it clear that we don't want people to come. You know, if someone has an interest in coming, come. And that's the deal and that's it. But we're not a kind of outreach project that needs people to come. Like if someone can't explain why they're there and why it's a good deal for them, then it's not a relationship we want to enter.
Of course, yeah. And how do you reach all these different communities?
In the beginning, completely word by mouth. You know, emails doesn't work. It was like, oh, you have to talk to such and such who runs such and such group and talk to them and they will find it interesting. And then because we've been there for 6 years, it's changed a little bit. But a lot of word to mouth.
Okay, thanks.
And you also have a clear enough message, you know. We are going picking for the day. Like you can't be too overly complicated and like this is a project about alternative economies.
But yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's
exactly what I'll actually, if you don't mind me asking you another question, Kathrin, and that's exactly something I would like to talk to you about. When you said something like early on in your presentation, you can't go with you can't get connected with some local group or some participants or generate a group, informal or formal. Like you were saying, if you go and you start saying, yeah, this is all about anti-capitalism, or this is about alternative economies, or this is about that. So kind of like what's, in terms of almost like a practical advice, like how have you engaged with that, having access to your knowledge, your connections, sophisticated here or there, but then engaging in a conversation that doesn't alienate people, and maybe discussing ideas through practice, through making, rather than through a theoretical approach. I mean, is there any?
No, I think like when I showed those workshops of like mapping out economies, you know, that's something where you just make it a practical tool to think about it, so this can be easily done. Like if we, you know, I really don't know if we have the answer to anything, but like when we wanted to introduce politics, because there's always a danger that you just come across as a charity and a nice social thing, and actually, you know, that's nice, but actually I'm about economy and society, you know. So we normally quite carefully have formats that allow us to bridge quite a lot of interest and topics. So like with politics, we started doing digesting politics lunches, where we would have guests who have very strong political opinions about food production and organize a lunch around it that then comes with a code of conduct, like how we talk to each other, how we respect everyone's politics, and then just make it a lived practice. And I think that's with the economic discussion as well. You know, on this trip, when everybody fills in an out sheet at the end of the day, it feels like a day that everybody was co-funding and taking from. So this relation, this, you know, not this clear division between provider and receiver or consumer and producer, to dissolve that can be quite easily done by raising it as an issue and proclaiming everybody to be both.
And you know, that's a very good example, like the sheets that people have to fill, because in fact it's almost like it's a practical way of actually realizing or getting awareness of questions around transaction or trade, or transaction and capital in general. Is that like, did you come to those formats? Did you arrive to those formats like through the experience of you know, working around within community?
No, I think it's a lot of like Gibson's thinking, or take back the economy, just make it explicit.
Yeah.
You're all giving, you're all taking. What is it?
May I ask another question? And I'm sorry for monopolizing, but then I'll leave it. You were
Your mic. I have real problems hearing you.
Okay, I'll speak closer to the mic. You were referring to this self-reflective practice that you had with the re-emergence of Black Lives Matter movement last year in the summer, but you were referring a lot to the actual institution or the conditions of the institution. I was wondering whether you also, and that was really about almost like there is an ethical imperative to that self-reflection in terms of your recognitions of your privilege or etc. I was wondering whether you had also, through the journey, engaged in an ethical concern or question around the power relations between you as an artist and the symbolic capital that you might gain as an artist and the communities of interest that you were working with. Because that's a typical issue that emerges within social art practice.
Yeah, no, I think that's the moment where it can easily tip.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think until 2 years ago, I probably would have but I would have like more confidentially have organized events around economy that took place at the pavilion. Whereas now, because we have this new policy of things have to be co-produced, I can't just walk ahead and go like, great, right, so we do this, because someone else has to support it. And that's just, this is a small enough round. Yeah, I'm really being super frank here. But that needs, you know, I can't impose ideas onto the organization that no one else supports. So that means I actually have to talk about it. I have to find out who else is interested and have to co-curate these things. So that's why we are like organizing less this year with the Center for Plausible Economies. It would be so easy to organize a big international thing around artistic practices, economic practice, and then to use company drinks, which, you know, it is, you know, it's been there for 7 years. It has a lot of currency. But that's a programming I'm completely shying away at the moment, until I've built up, or we as a team have built up, a system where we actually fit it in, where we localize it more.
Colette, anyone?
I have a question that might relate to that in terms of extending. I was thinking about the future legacy of the project, and that maybe when it first started, you know, you talked about the reasons how it came about and how that was related to sort of specific interests that you had, and this opportunity then arose that connected with a history, and then reflecting on that in relation to its kind of currency and importance now in society. And I wonder that maybe at that time, had you thought about the possibility of creating something that would have a long-term future legacy and impact, both in the direct local community, or was that something that's evolved? And is that more at stake now, 7 years in? Are you thinking about it in terms of it having a future, a company that would be still there maybe in 20 years' time? What's your thinking around that, or how is that being discussed? Is it being discussed even?
Yeah. I think first of all, I think in business terms, most new startups fail. Like I think 50% don't exist anymore after 2 years. So in business terms, we are very successful because we are still here after 7 years. Like locally, our attitude is like we're here for the next 25 years. We've just signed a lease for 25 years. So no one's thinking of it as a project. Everyone's thinking of it as something that should stay. How you maintain this is more difficult because it needs money, it needs fundraising. But to make this not this kind of dreaded thing, then for me it's interesting again to like connect it back to this idea of community and diverse economies, because then my fundraising isn't just a super boring admin job. It's actually to acknowledge the financial side of our economic underpinnings, but to also remind myself that the others need also to be articulated and to make it a topic. So it's not an admin task, but it's my practice. It's a bit, I think with Cobh, it's precarious. We have super conservative bookkeeping, so we always try to have the money in place for the next year before we do anything. To give everybody, we're a tiny operation, so it's like £100,000 a year. Just to make this clear, it's not a big operation. We are all part-time, but still for everybody to have the security that for the next 12 months, those 2 days a week will be paid, and that's fine. But it's a bit daunting to think about how this money will come in again and again. And I think in the beginning, there was a bit of romantic imagination of this being financially sustainable, self-sustainable. And I said from the beginning, it won't, because with our principles of like trading and pricing, it can't. So I was always trying to be really frank about the fact that we will need diverse income, and it would be unfair to expect from a community project that's not profit orientated in a borough that's quite drained of resources thanks to the Tories, plus a pandemic, plus a population that's really suffering from everything that's going on. To expect someone like Company Drinks to be financially successful is just, I don't even know what to call it, stupid. Yeah. So we, from the beginning, completely rejected this expectation that we could make enough money from drinks to finance this thing. Impossible if you know the economy of food. And that was, things like this were, it was important to have Catherine Gibson as a support, because she's very good. She's like, just tell them your return, your social return is fast, it's really fast. Financial return a bit slower. Just say it's a bit slower, but just say you're really good on return, but the social one. But this is confidence and competence within this kind of economic practice, where people want this idea that you're like a successful business, but what's that? And I think we always also try to not just be nailed down as a kind of social enterprise, because it's, no, we're more than that. So, and then to introduce this idea of commoning, which it's such an unhelpful term, outside of the art world, who is really interested in commons? Anyway, I'm not quite sure what I'm saying right now, but to reject the idea that you could financially successful with something like this is impossible. On kind of capitalist terms, impossible. We've costed it 1 million times. We've really costed it. Like, how many drinks would we have to sell to make? Unless we would only sell alcohol or streamline it, just like impossible.
When I was listening to you, I was thinking what must it be like to be a practitioner who's sort of moving more into policy and admin, and like it does sound like that, but then actually that last piece that you've just described brings it back home again, that's what the practice is. The practice is the social comeback, it's the prioritizing of that over the monetary comeback, or at least the sort of, well, I don't mean to put words into your mouth, but it's just that the shifting of balance away from maybe the monetary in and seeing the value in other comeback. I don't know.
I also describe, like on my own terms, Company Drinks is my studio. I don't think of it as a admin task. Of course, there's admin, but you would have that, you have this everywhere. But I really try and think of it as a studio where I can practice ideas on a one-to-one scale.
And does everybody else who's involved in the project think of it as a practice as well, do you think?
Yeah, we just had an interesting discussion today that because it's about roles and functions and competence. So we said we would allow, or everybody can be a head of something. And this head of something is defined by the interest everybody brings to the team. So my interest is art, so I'll be the head of diverse economies. And other people are there with a huge interest in like youth development or community growing. So to make space within the organizations for everybody to come with their individual interest, not just in terms of fitting the job description, but acknowledging that interest. So then my interest in art and economy can be acknowledged next to someone else's interest in youth development. And that's for me quite essential, like how I think of myself as an artist, that my way of cultural production is completely equal with other people's way of organizing culture within their sphere. So that was really nice today, that we all agreed that we are all heads of something, and we are heads of something because that's where our interest is, maybe our intellect lies, and to make space for this within the organization. That also suddenly allows me to think of fundraising as a creative thing now that I'm head of diverse economies. I have to fundraise. But I think that is quite, and that's for me, that's why Company Drinks is also the studio where to test ideas. I can talk about cultural democracy for an hour, but how do you actually practice it, next to someone else? How can you say, well, what you're doing is culturing things. You're culturing around growing things. I'm culturing things around artistic and economic practices to like make space for those things to actually literally sit next to each other. Yeah. Which the thinking, I think, of Stephen Wright and this idea of like competence, artistic competence is useful, because then you're just one of many competences that, I mean, if you want things to be done collaboratively and interdisciplinary, then you can't have a hierarchy about art. But and still have fun with it.
Is it okay to ask one last question? I don't know if we have time again. I'm curious about the demographics of the 6 people and how they formed. How did you all come together to form this group of diverse interests as well?
Yeah, like in this like organic way, which exposes us to the critique of institutional racism.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So me, and then I can't remember, and then people just entered and stayed, but there was never kind of an official process of like applying and checking against diversity policies. It was just always people came and stayed, which is also nice. But at the moment, so it's 6 of us, 5 of us are women. 4 of us are women, 5 of us are white, 3 of us are local, and age range, it's roughly between 25 and 60. So there's diversity, but in terms of racial diversity, it's white, mainly white.
I mean, that would be, I mean, how do I put this? It's important to recognize it as an issue, which is absolutely fundamental, but it's also, it's like, it's in line with the majority of the sector, whether, say, in the UK. You see, if you think of a project starting from within the art sector, the majority of the art sector in the UK has the same issues and the same demographics that you kind of referred to now.
Yeah, and I think that's why, yeah, you know. So I think ask me again in a year, but that's why we're going through a process of acknowledging it, and not just filling the gaps because we need our diversity numbers, but being prepared as an organization to be the right kind of environment for someone who's non-white to come, because we did have conflict with this in the past.
Okay, but do you feel that the ethnic divide that you described, say, is it possible to dissociate it from a class divide that you may also identify within company drinks or beyond?
I mean, I think overall, and that's the feedback we get, people are quite amazed by who gets together through company drinks. And it's, you know, like, what am I, like, I'm seen as like middle class, cosmopolitan, cultural, liberal. But that's definitely not the majority in the project. And I think at most events, but that's why we need to have policies in place, because that's what we want. And that's, I think, what we've successfully done over many years, to bring quite an incredible range of people and interests and opinions together. But we, for example, didn't have solid procedures in place, like in case something happens, you know, racist incident, what do we actually do? Who is in charge in that situation on the day to stop it and follow it up? So we were lucky that it hasn't happened much until recently, but that's the shortcomings we have as an organization. And that's, I think, before we actively invite others in, we have to have those procedures like solidly in place, to not risk inviting someone in and then going like, oops, we were racist again.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question that I think that's a really important method. I mean, this would be something for me to talk with Colette and Marilyn and others, also everyone here actually in this meeting, because somehow I moved to Ireland from England, and the question around, I say, what is named in UK as, say, like diversity and so on, and equality policies within, it's somehow important here as well, but somehow maybe less prevalent yet still, because the ethnic homogeneity of the population is different from that in the UK. But yeah, I don't know, it's a really important matter actually to consider.
But I think that's also why I take the art pressure, the pressure from my art colleagues seriously. You know, if like people demand any cultural organization that has like radical ideas to also have radical practices, you know, I'm feeling responsible to do that. You know, I can't walk around talking about feminist economies and then we have organizational structures in place that are potentially racist. You know, it doesn't fit together. So yeah, I mean, I've had this now for a year, that the way I talk about company drinks shifts from this narrative of that's how we did it and that's why it's successful, to actually the struggles within, which I bet to experienced community organizers, they're like typical artists, they haven't thought about it.
And I mean, just Colette, anyone wants to make a final question or comment? So Kathrin, just maybe to conclude, what was the drive and how does it relate to the Center for Plausible Economies, which you presented briefly? So what was the drive behind it, and how does it intersect with company dreams? Maybe my interpretation is probably wrong, but when I came across it, I thought about it as maybe like the intellectual arm of company drinks. So yeah.
Well, it's the art-led action research arm, but it's the program that brings an art discussion back to what company drinks is. And there's interest. Company drinks is used quite a lot by all sorts of discourse to discuss all sorts of things. So it's also to have have active ownership of this discourse rather than just being used as a case study by others all the time.
And what is the, and you described very well during the presentation, use, the logo, the branding, the use of the word company, the use of the C to refer to alternatives to company, but also to drink brands such as Coca-Cola, who actually is a quintessential example of capitalism. So, for instance, the use of the word plausible, where does it come from, and what kind of meaning you're trying to convey, rather than use alternative, possible, and so on?
Yeah, I think it's a bit like, it's the same with like the company being ambivalent, like using a language that doesn't polarize too much, but talks more about the possibility to actually doing it different instead of claiming an alternative position. And alternative is just not a useful term. Yeah. I think it also puts you in opposition, and that's Gibson Graham. I think that's one of their main points, to say you shouldn't be in opposition. You should come from a emancipated position where you take back something, don't. Yeah. So plausible. I mean, of course, it was ironic to have this like big name for it, but we thought the art world can stand this. They can have it. They'll be okay with a name like that.
Okay. Well, I think it's we came to the end of our time. I guess we could stay here another hour, 2 hours. Maybe we'll do a long day seminar. But first of all, I want to thank everyone who joined us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And also to thank, of course, Kathrin for the time and for the generous sharing. Not just a practice, but actually the complications of a practice and the critical reflections that you're now engaging with, rather than do the typical, presentation where you just focus on the positives. You were also very generous in sharing with us the questions that you're now facing, and which I'm sure all of us will also use to reflect on our own individual practice, but also our collective practices. And I mean, it's just a pleasure and an opportunity to hear you and to see such a diverse energy floating around all those ideas. And you only presented a little bit of what you do, so maybe we'll have another opportunity to discuss maybe something else. So because it's a very composite practice that really, I mean, in my mind, is really at the core of what art should be today, and maybe and so deserves this kind of more dialogue around it. Okay, anyone else want to say a final word?
Thanks very much. That was very interesting and useful, and thanks for being so open, like Miguel said as well. And I just wanted to say, on the topic of racism, this week there's been a really interesting talks as part of Douglas Week. So the visit of Frederick Douglass to Cork in the 1800s, and there's, I'm learning lots. There's still, I think, tomorrow and Saturday, I think, might be the last talks, and they'll also have them online. So definitely check it out anywhere in the world, wherever you are. It's interesting material.
I'd just like to say thanks. It was great. Really enjoyed.
Thanks for your time. Thanks
really enjoyed your practice, and I realized that you're behind this as well. Yeah. I only discovered that today, so it's really nice to actually to see that, yes, this was you as well.
yeah, that's another theme that we didn't even.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I get that there's so much more to your practice, and it'd be great to.
Quite interesting, Kathrin, that so Cobh, where Sirius is based, and Cobh Zero Waste, and it's actually considered being part of the rural eastern eastern part of County Cork. So the questions around the rural and the urban, and actually the the community empowerment that some of us want to also develop, it's very crucial here as well. And I was really thinking about the book. I actually, but and also how does that intersect? Even when you described the like your London map, you know, and
yeah, I mean, it's completely about
and also, but all the
history and
mental map and your map relates to traditions in UK of, you know, like a class division and so on, but also it's quite a so yeah, more food for thought for us here as well. All right, so thank you so much. And
meet you all.
Thanks very much, Kathrin. I really appreciate the liveness, like the liveness of the discussion. Like there is so right now in what's happening with you. I really appreciated that.
But I love those. I love evenings like today because they make me think. And you know, my practice is so much about the one-to-one. And I think the one-to-one at the moment requires reflection and adjustment rather than pretend. So I think I've just realized that, yeah.
But it's so valuable to hear that literally as you're doing it. It's just really great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a million.
all right, thank you so much. See you soon at some point, Kathrin.
Thanks, Miguel and Colette.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.